Okay, so I think we'll get going. This group on my left, where's Brad? Oh. Are you the spokesperson?
Thank you. Ajahn, there was all sorts of praise and confidence that people have got because of your very great understanding of the Pali, and both of you, basically. That was one of the key things seen by this team. You break the words and go to the root of the meaning and then try to give the best possible interpretation in English.
I'll just be more direct next time. I just said, please.
So that is something that
the praise
you
for
don't
the
find
workshop.
usually.
Yeah, just ask that question. Oh, no. Okay,
yeah.
Good. Thank you, friend. That's very good.
That's, I think, the key point. See, others are, I'll read them as they are. Piti Sukha is nothing to do with the body, number one. Number two, clearly knowing what is in and what is not in when going to Samadhi, identifying the real Dhamma in Samadhi. Number three, understanding of the required conditions to get into deep meditation, required conditions. Number four, good clarification inspired us to follow the path in confidence. Next one, clarified some doubts and strengthened my understanding of the Dhamma. Number six, Ajahn taking effort to carefully interpret the Pali words into English so that Buddha's teaching come to us more accurately and fresh, I suppose. Number seven, understanding that letting go of the five senses is an important aspect of the path to liberation. Then the next one is understanding that jhana is possible, even at this time, and has given me the confidence to try. Next one, Niramisa Sukha, spiritual happiness, in brackets, is the product of the jhana. Next one, the reference points of the suttas provided in your teachings and the slides is extremely useful. And that's something not easy to find. So that means you have given the reference, it's not coming from the two teachers. Understanding what right jhana is and what is not. So it enables us to filter through all sorts of doubtful teachings. At least we have some confidence. We know what the Buddha talked about. An entomology of Pali words to explain the real meaning. Same as what I had in number 6.
Yeah.
So basically,
okay.
That's what it is.
Thank you, Mr. Brett. I just want to comment on a couple of things there, and maybe Sunyo would like as well. The first thing is, you say that it helps you to interpret what real jhana is. That's what they say in every center around the world. Yeah, thank you to the teacher for helping us interpret the jhana in the right way. And some of those places, they will have the wrong interpretation.
Yes.
So how do we know that this is the right interpretation?
Because you are quoting the suttas, and we have the confidence in you.
Okay. But it's interesting, right? Because everyone has that kind of... That's why we have teachers, and we think the teachers have it right. But sometimes the teachers haven't got it right. So it is important to take even the teacher's word with a pinch of salt. And that's why we use the suttas, of course. But always to know that there is a degree of uncertainty when you are listening to any teacher is always, I think, useful as well. I'm not trying to deceive you or anything, of course, but that's the way it is.
So, Leha, can you organize another PhD for Ajahn?
No, I was thinking, you know how Ajahn Brahmali has done the teacher's accreditation for the spiritual educational group? So he should do a jhana accreditation, Ajahn. In 12 months' time, you will develop the questionnaire, and then they will go through the questionnaire, and then you're like, yep, here's your jhana certificate.
Yeah.
Okay.
But before you go on to the next one, I wanted to comment on... Do you want to say anything, Sunyo, or? So one thing I wanted to comment on.
No, I'm happy.
Okay. One thing I wanted to say is this... I just wanted to comment on what Venerable Sunyo said about the piti being niramisa, being spiritual and not having anything to do with the body. That is true in the jhana, and that's kind of the point. Yeah. So within the jhana state, it's a purely mental phenomenon. But remember that piti and sukha, they start long before you get into jhana. That's one of the kind of points we've been trying to make. That it starts off with pamudja, which is like the initial kind of gladness. Then you have the piti. Then you have the passaddhi. Yeah, so pamudja, gladness, piti, rapture, whatever. Passaddhi, tranquility. Then you have the sukha, the bliss. Then you have the samadhi, and that is the kind of samadhi which is non-physical, it's purely mental. But prior to that, you're still in the physical realm. Yeah, you still have some feeling of the body. So piti, in that prior to that, will often have a physical component to it. It will feel like it is in the body. There will be like, almost like, electricity or something, or waves of pleasure even going through the body, and that can be the piti. So it depends where you are on this path. So it comes in stages, and that's kind of an important thing to realize. But it's only when it becomes very profound that actually it is purely mental in nature. Would you like to comment more on that, Venerable, or are you?
Yeah, well, sometimes people make those kind of feelings of energy in your body the goal of meditation, but I think you can do very well without them and just bypass that and go straight to mental piti. That's why I focused on that mostly. Basically, the nimittas, which precede the jhanas, are also not bodily piti. They are also mental. Yeah. So, yeah, maybe the other group. Yeah, you can say what you had.
So, the first thing that our group came up with was that basically the jhanas are like a door to escape samsara, which is often overlooked. So they're very critical. So they're like a vital tool for awakening. Then one of the most important takeaways was to know what is not jhana. So basically you have to let go of the whole sensory world for it to be jhana. And you need the whole Eightfold Path. So to access jhanas, then understanding the subtlety of the hindrances was one point that came up. There was body pleasure bad, mind pleasure good. That's one point.
Bad.
And kind of on the same note as the one on the hindrances, that you don't really understand the hindrances before you have experienced a jhana. And that it's more than concentration. That concentration can give very one-sided view of what samadhi means. And then also Rupa was wondering about like the jhana meditation that the Buddha taught versus like modern mindfulness meditation, where you basically note like sensory experience as part of the meditation. So like should you completely stop that kind of meditation if you want to attain jhanas? Yeah.
Well, we'll answer that question in a moment, but I am happy that nobody had as their takeaway from the workshop that jhanas are too hard or something like that. Because I was afraid of that when we are constantly saying that the jhanas are like profound and deep and take a lot of practice. I was almost afraid that we were scaring people away from meditation. And even at lunchtime, Ajahn Brahm asked the people, and how was the workshop? Did you attain any jhanas? And then somebody said, no, what we learned is that we don't have the jhanas. And so I was afraid that would be the takeaway, that it would be too hard or too difficult, or that it would only be for monastics, something like that. But I'm happy nobody said that, and actually somebody wrote that it is possible. And it is possible to attain the jhanas, because the jhanas is not something you do. It's something, as I said last week, that is a result of letting go. And so maybe some of you, after this workshop, think it's so profound, these jhanas, I'm going to stop meditating. And if you do that, then you might actually be close to jhanas. If you sit there and you think, I'm just going to stop meditating, that is the kind of moment when the mind actually can let go and can go very deep. There's this story that Ajahn Brahm sometimes tells, that in Wapananachat there was a novice who was listening to a talk of Ajahn Chah, and Ajahn Chah just went on and on and on for hours, and then the novice thought, when is Ajahn Chah finally going to stop? When is he going to stop? When is he going to stop? Then the novice thought, when am I going to stop? And then he stopped, and he went into a very deep meditation, jhana probably, and he was there the next morning still in the Dhamma hall sitting there. And that is the kind of letting go that the mind can do. And letting go is not something you do in a way. It's the opposite of doing, is when you stop. And you all have the ability to stop in your meditation, to not do anything and let it all happen by itself. You're all virtuous enough, you have all the supporting conditions that you need to be able to experience these things.
It's in a sense like jhana happens to you rather than you doing jhana.
Yeah, despite of you, basically.
Yeah. But another thing, which I find which is interesting about the fact that the jhanas are so deep is that there is so much happiness and so much bliss and so many good things to be had on the path before you get to the jhana. Yeah, there's so much enjoyment a long, long way before you go into these particular states. And so don't worry, you're still going to have lots of enjoyment and lots of happiness and lots of tranquility and peace and all of these good things. And in a sense, it makes the path even more exciting and interesting that you have this kind of thing which is, I got so much happiness already. And then there is even more beyond the corner, even more beyond that. And I remember Ajahn Brahm many years ago, he said that, sometimes there's so much bliss, you don't know if you can take any more bliss because there's just too much bliss on this path. And that's kind of exciting and interesting, right? That the path is so full of these extraordinary states of immense happiness. So to me, it's just the fact that the jhanas are very high up is okay as long as it is something which is kind of we're moving towards in a sense and something really interesting.
Yeah, and when Ajahn Brahm tells about that reaction, and I've had it as well, that you're like, oh, it's too much bliss, I can't take it. And that is even before the jhanas, because you're still thinking, oh, I can't take it. And we will show that in the jhanas, that kind of thinking cannot happen. Which also sort of connects to the question that somebody had, like, should we abandon the noting kind of meditation? Because it's also kind of thinking in a way, altogether, if we want to pursue the jhanas. And my answer would be, what is the way to enter the jhanas is to abandon the hindrances. So whatever helps you abandon the hindrances or makes your mind more peaceful, that is a helpful meditation. Meditation can be done in so many ways. And sometimes this noting actually can get you more peaceful and gives you a little bit of insight in your mind as well. So if you find it helpful, I wouldn't say abandon it totally. But at some point you will have to stop noting, otherwise you cannot abandon the thinking, which you will need to do to enter the jhanas. That's what my answer would be. I don't do it myself, that noting. Although in the beginning I did note sometimes the hindrances, like, what is happening? It's restlessness. That helps you sort of identify the hindrances as well. Yeah. You have any thoughts on that, Ajahn?
Just that noting is not really mentioned in the suttas. It is a particular interpretation of the suttas. When the breath goes in long, you are aware the breath goes long, and then the idea is that, well, that's actually a noting, but it's not really noting in the suttas. It's just you're just aware of what's going on. So it is an additional thing to what is in the suttas. So I don't think it really is, certainly isn't required. And I know some people, they get attached to the noting, they can't stop noting. Yeah, they kind of have everything they do, they just note, and then it becomes a hindrance often in the practice. So it really depends on how you do it. So you just have to see what happens, I suppose. All right.
All right.
Okay, shall we? Let's carry on. So, ding. Okay, so we're going to continue with the factors of the first jhana. Right? So we're going through the phrases one by one. So you have the viviceva kamehi, vivicha kusalehi dhammehi, and then it goes savitakkang savichara. No, this comes after. No, first of all it's piti sukha.
No,
Viveka
this
piti
is first,
sukha.
I think.
This is first. So we got it in the wrong order. Okay, never mind.
Doesn't matter.
Never mind. Yeah. So this is the next kind of phrase in the suttas. Savitakkang savichara. So sa means with. So with vitakka and with vichara. And these are very interesting words. And the question is, how should they be understood? And these words, the way they are used in the suttas, vitakka and vichara, very often actually mean thinking in the suttas. So the question is, what does it actually mean in the first jhana? Does it mean thinking, or does it not mean that? And remember that words often have a range of meanings. And even in English, we would use the word thinking sometimes to mean very coarse thought, and sometimes very subtle thought. And as we shall see, the same thing is true in the Pali language as well, that these can have very subtle meanings. You see the translation here by Bhante Sujato, placing the mind and keeping it connected, it hints at a very subtle version of these words. So let's have a look. Can you think in jhana, right? This is the question here, because it's very commonly assumed that you can think in the jhanas. So one of the important pieces of evidence to understand this is that in the second jhana, vitakka and vichara come to an end. Yeah, this is that is specifically how it is defined, the second jhana, the ending of vitakka-vicara. And because vitakka-vicara end in the second jhana, it must mean that the first jhana is the very last remnant of vitakka-vicara, because it is a gradual process of calming down. The calming down becomes more and more profound the deeper you go in your meditation. So the first jhana is the very last tiny, beanie-meanie, whatever, I don't know what the right English word is now, but tiny amount of vitakka-vicara left, and then it comes to complete stop. And this is a very important indication of what vitakka-vicara means in the first jhana. It's the final remnant of this activity of the mind, whatever you want to call it. So here is a sutta which shows you this quite nicely. So since I know and see thus, and this refers to the jhanas, Venerable Sir, and this is Chitta, the householder, very famous meditator. He was a non-returner, and he had access to all the jhanas. And here he is speaking with the Nigantanatāputa, or Mahavira, the leader of the Jains. And this is what he's saying to the leader of the Jains. Since I know and see the jhanas, he already has the jhanas, in what other ascetic or Brahmin need I place faith regarding the claim that there is stillness without vitakka and vichara, a cessation of vitakka and vichara? So he's saying that because I know the jhanas, I don't need any faith in anyone. He has just been challenged by Mahavira whether he has faith in the Buddha. He says, no, I don't really go by faith in the Buddha in this. I know this from my own understanding and direct insight into these jhanas. So just saying that there is an end of these things in the second jhana. And again, the point then is that in the first jhana is going to be the last tiny remnant of what is left. So, and you can imagine what is the last remnant of thinking. And the last remnant of thinking is really thinking is like a movement of the mind, right? That's what thinking really is about. The mind moves, and that is kind of the requirement to think is that there is some kind of movement within, whether it's pictures or words or whatever. Yeah. So that's what we can expect the vitakka-vicara to be in the first jhana, that very last movement of the mind. And this is what this translation here is about, placing the mind and keeping it connected, is this idea of the very last remnant of what's happening with the thinking mind, last movement of the mind. The specific translation here is actually a little bit based on commentarial ideas, and I'll come back to those commentarial ideas later on when we come towards the end of this. So when they are given up and eliminated, only thoughts that accord with the teaching are left. So this is this is from the Anguttara Nikaya 3's 101, I think, the Pangsudovaka Sutta, the earth washing sutta. And the idea here is that the thinking mind is given up stage by stage. So stage by stage we give up the coarse thoughts, then we give up the medium thoughts, then the refined thoughts. And when the refined thoughts are given up, only this is left, thoughts that accord with the teaching, with the Dhamma. In other words, thoughts that accord with the Dhamma are wholesome thoughts, thoughts that don't have any defilements in them. So thinking about a Dhamma topic or just having metta, loving kindness, these kind of thoughts. So these are the very kind of last thing, That stillness is not peaceful or sublime or tranquil or unified, but is held in place by active suppression. So as long as there's any kind of thought, even the most refined thought,
wind. Even the overhead projector is falling asleep. How about all you? Are you still awake? After lunch, it can sometimes be difficult to stay awake. Ajahn Brahm was trying to keep us awake with jokes in the monks' hut.
It didn't have lunch.
It didn't have lunch, but...
Should be all right. Okay, so the idea here is that after going through a long process of eliminating thoughts, only a tiny little bit of thinking is left that accord with the Dhamma. It could just be, reflecting on the Buddha's qualities or something very simple. Even that is actually problematic. So you have to give up even the final remnant of thinking to be able to enter a jhana state. This is really what this is about. And then you go to the peaceful and sublime and unified state after that. For someone who has attained the first absorption, speech has ceased. So the idea here, of course, is that inner speech and outer speech are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have outer speech when you have, you can only have outer speech when you have inner speech. So in other words, all speech, either within or without, has to come to an end for the first absorption to happen. For someone who has attained the second absorption, the placing of the mind and keeping it connected have ceased. So the very last movement of the mind is then stopped when you go into the second jhana. So this is kind of, you can see the stage-wise relinquishment of the activities of the mind, one jhana after the other one. Okay, Venerable Sunyo,
all right.
Fire away.
Let me get a bit closer. Easier. Do some of you sometimes have a bad hair day? When your hair just doesn't want to go right? Well, we monks don't have that. But I have a bad robe day today. That's what we have. When your robe doesn't just want to sit right. So that's why that happens some days. Anyway, so we're talking about Vitakka-vicara here. And some translations that exist are thought and examination. That's Venerable Bodhi's. Thinking and pondering. Translations along these lines, I am not so happy with. Because it's sort of misleading what it actually Vitakka-vicara is in the first jhana. As Ajahn Brahmali correctly pointed out, the first jhana is like the last remnant of any kind of activity of the mind. When you meditate, you focus on an object, and that object will become more and more subtle. Often we start with the breathing, and that breathing turns very pleasurable, and then the mind turns away from the breathing. This is one way it can go. And then the nimittas arise, these beautiful perceptions of the mind, usually lights, but can be different as well. And your mind sort of stays with that nimitta and can move away a bit again. But in the jhana, it's like the mind focuses on only the joy aspect of that experience. And it stays with the joy or bliss, and it doesn't go on other objects. But what happens is the mind recognizes that this is very peaceful and blissful, and it tries to grab that bliss, and it tries to really be with it and stay with it. But that grabbing is an activity that actually makes the mind more, in a way, it sort of disturbs the mind and it disturbs the peace. So that grabbing reduces the peace. And then the mind moves away from that peace again because it's like destroyed in a way, a little bit. But the mind recognizes and moves back to the peace again. So it's hard to put this into words, but Ajahn Brahm calls this also a wobble of the mind. And the word wobble, to me, actually makes a lot of sense. The mind is like going back and forth. The object is always the piti sukha, but it sort of shifts, wobbles back and forth in a way. It stays with it, but it closer and farther apart in a way. And that is, of course, a very different idea from thinking and pondering. Thinking and pondering does not reflect that at all, those kind of translations. That's why I have sad smiley face, the sad smiley face with those translations. But in a way, even in English, what do we call thinking? Is thinking this? I don't know what I'm gonna have for lunch today. Or is thinking, when is my sister's birthday again? Is that the kind of thinking? That is what we call thinking in English. But the concept of thinking, even in English, goes much deeper than this. Thinking, we usually think, when we hear the word, about the words that happen inside our mind. That is what we usually call thinking. But throughout history, people have used the word thinking and thought, also in English, for much deeper concepts as well. And I haven't read the whole book because it's very thick. But it's apparently a very famous book, and it's this called Thinking Fast and Slow, by a Nobel Prize winner called Daniel Kahneman. And I read the introduction, and it talks about thinking fast and slow. And slow thinking is what he calls this kind of thinking. When is the birthday of my sister again? The thinking in words. But fast thinking, he says, is much more subtle processes. And included within that, he says also just applying your attention to something. For example, when you hear a sound, when you automatically focus on the source of that sound, that is what he calls thinking fast. So it's not just the Buddha who used the word thinking in a much wider way than what ordinary language uses it. Even philosophers and people use the word thinking much more widely in English as well. For example, we could even say about animals that they think, but obviously they don't have kind of words to describe things that us human beings are often stuck within our heads with all these words. That's what we think about with thinking. Even animals, they think, but it's much more less verbal. So this explains why the Buddha used the word Vitakka-vicara for something more subtle, not because it was a funny use of the word. It's actually implied within the word Vitakka-vicara is much more deeper ideas, much more subtle ideas. And it's the same with English thinking as well. We can probably make up more examples of this in English, but I hope that I made this point. Do I make sense? Yeah, that even in English thinking is not just words. Yeah? So in a way, depends on how you look at it. Maybe thinking could be okay, maybe, but jhana is much more subtle. This is Venerable Analayo. After looking at many suttas, he concludes, the first jhana is something far deeper than the type of mental condition in which conceptual, by which he means verbal, thought and reflection take place. The range of vitakka goes beyond conceptual thought as such, covering also the sense of an inclination of the mind, a movement of the mind. That's just included in the word vitakka. And when we translate it as pondering, or that's vichara, thinking, that sort of, you lose that. And that is why we also get some other translations. Now, Venerable Anālio is also very well known for his work on the Chinese texts. And from him and also some others, I also learned that the Chinese texts use, well, is there anybody who can read these Chinese symbols? Yeah, what is it? How do you pronounce the first one? Xue. Jue. And the second one? One. Okay. Well, the suttas are in ancient Chinese, so it may have had a different meaning back then. But this is what I learned from Charles Patton, who is a translator of these texts as well. That the first one, I already forgot how to say it. Xuan or something? Juan. Chinese. It's difficult. That it means initial noticing, something like that, and not thinking. And the other one, the Wang, or something like that, Wang, means something like sustained examination. So, most of you may not know, but the Chinese texts are very old, but they're translations themselves. They're translations from Sanskrit suttas, which are very similar to Pali suttas. So what we learn here is that the Chinese translators, all the way back then, and when would this have been, Ajahn, in the history of
this would have been maybe 5th or 6th century AD.
Yeah, so a long time ago, they already decided to translate Vitakka and Vicara not as thinking and pondering, but in the way like initial noticing, sustained examination, something like that. Yeah. But throughout the rest of the Chinese corpus, they always use other words for thinking, and not these, not the Wang and Shuren. I'm sorry, your Chinese is just so difficult. Maybe we should do the in Dutch translations next time.
Dutch is a good idea.
Yeah, so yeah. Gedachte is thinking. Yes. Yes. So my point here is that when the Chinese translated the Sanskrit text, they already realized it was known in their tradition that in the jhānas, Vitakka-vicara does not have the usual sense of thinking. It means something much more subtle. So this is well known not only in the Chinese tradition, but of course also in the Pali tradition and other schools of Buddhism as well. Also very well known amongst translators. So although some translators have things like thinking and pondering, others have things like initial and sustained application, placing the mind and keeping it connected. And Ajahn Brahm has moving towards and holding the object. And the object is the Piti Sukha, as I said before. And these translations get my thumbs up more so than the other ones, because they're more, they're more correct in a way. Yeah, there's nothing much more to say. So, and Ajahn Brahm actually made this translation a couple years ago when he was translating the word of the Buddha. Some of you may have gone to his classes or seen them online. This is how he translates Vitakka-vicara. But when I saw that, I was so happy to see this translation, because I already made a translation of myself before I saw this one. And what did I do? This is mine. After you get fully separated from the sense objects or sense experiences, and separated from unskillful states, mind states, you attain the first jhana, where there is delight and pleasure caused by the separation from the senses, to which, that's not really in the Pali, but that's the idea, the mind moves and holds on. So I had the same idea. And this, to me, it's a simple moving and holding on. You get an idea of what it means. So it's a simple translation, but in a sense it's also very, very deep. And to me it really grabs the essence of what Vitakka-vicara is about. It's just a subtle movement of the mind, is the point we're making, and not thinking. And again, we sound like this record stuck on repeat. Maybe you're like, we know that now already. But it is important, I feel, to get a sense of this, because it really informs the way you meditate again. Just like I said before the break, if one teacher says in a meditation you should be thinking about your subject or noting, always thinking, then you get into the first jhana that way, then you will meditate very differently from when you think about it as the mind moving towards the object and holding it. You will be more inclined to actually abandon the thinking inside of your mind. It's actually, sometimes we think just because we forget that we can actually stop thinking in meditation. You're just sitting there and thinking, and you might even think, why am I thinking so much? But you forget that you can just stop thinking sometimes. You forget the Buddha's instructions. And that is why I think it's important that we are repeating this a lot, to get it into your mind that actually thinking is something that we abandon in meditation and leave behind because it's so coarse. Now, I said before that in English, even the word thinking is used much more broadly than just verbal thinking. And there's some hints to this in the Pali Canon as well, that it was the same at this time. And it talks here about right intention. And then it says, the thinking, thought, intention, mental absorption, mental fixity, directing of mind, verbal formations, in those whose mind is noble, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't really matter to my point. My point here is that these words are all more or less used synonymously here. And although this is a little bit of a later sutta, probably not an early one, probably not spoken by the Buddha, it's still in the Majjhima Nikaya, so it still goes way back. And you see here that they use similar kind of ideas. Directing of the mind is almost like synonymous with thinking here, which is vitakka. And also intention. Intention can, of course, be something much more subtle than thinking. When you have an intention for something, it can be subverbal. Ajahn, have you got anything to say about this?
Excellent. Sadhu.
Good sutta, sadhu to the sutta, yes. It's just, Venerable Bodhi's translations.
I think some of those translations are a bit...
Yeah, some, that's why I say some might be translated differently, but anyway, doesn't matter too much. To the point. So I said intentions can be very subtle. And now, similar that in the first jhana, when Ajahn Brahmali said earlier, when Vitakka-vicara cease in the second jhana, it must mean something very subtle has ceased. And we get the same idea here. Because where do unwholesome intentions cease completely? The first jhana. And where do wholesome intentions cease completely? The second jhana. So you have unwholesome intentions and wholesome intentions. In the second jhana, they cease completely. So that means all sorts of intentions, all sorts of directing the mind to one place or the other, all sorts of movement, that all falls under intention, and that has all ceased within the second jhana, which in turn implies very clearly to me anyway, that in the first jhana, whatever intentions there still were, was very subtle. It's basically the intention to move towards the piti sukha.
What is the Pali for intentions in this case?
Sankappa, I think, yeah.
Sankappa.
Yeah. Second jhana.
Okay, fair. All right.
Yeah. Maybe it's time for
Yeah.
the questions and meditation maybe as well, because
Absolutely.
before the break we also didn't have questions.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah.
you. Ajahn Brahm always says Ajahn Brahm can't achieve jhanas. He has to disappear first. Now that is non-self, right? Is non-self included in letting go of the defilements and all these things that we were talking about? Or is it something else? 5 hindrances and the 5 senses.
It's hard for me to hear you. At some point I thought you said, Ajahn Brahm says he has to disappear to enter the jhana. That's nonsense, right? That's what I thought you said. But you said no self. So if you can speak a bit louder, that makes
I think I heard.
Okay, so
I'll
okay,
give a
you did,
reply.
okay.
I think I heard the question here. So I think the idea is that non-self is something that you realize in stages. So there is a degree of non-self, not the complete non-self. Yeah. So one of the most important aspects of the self is the idea that you are the doer, you are the agent in your life, and that agency you have to give up. And that is probably the most important part of the self-delusion, is that sense of agency. There's still a little bit left after that. There's still the idea of knowing. Just you can take that jhana experience also as a self. So there's a little bit more to go, but you have given up a very large part of it. And that's what Ajahn Brahm means by Ajahn Brahm has to go. That Ajahn Brahm as an agent has to disappear here.
I would say it's just a temporary cessation of the whole sense of self, actually.
Yeah.
Also with regard to the knowing, but it's not like it's called temporary liberation. So you don't abandon it completely in the sense as in permanently, but you do abandon it completely for a while, I would say.
I think the point is that there is...
But I didn't hear the question.
Yeah,
so
I think the point is that there is what is called the asmimana nusaya, which is the underlying tendency to the thought I am. That hasn't gone. That only goes with stream entry, because you temporarily understand things fully. So even though the sense of self isn't there in a jhana, because you can't think, so you can't have a sense of self in that way, the underlying tendency is still there. So then when you come out afterwards, you can take that experience as a self. And that, I think, is the kind of the issue, probably.
Yeah, thank you, Ajahn.
Yeah.
That was 1.1a. 1.1b is now Anguttara Nikaya 10.72 says sound is a thorn to jhana. Now, by that time, you have closed all your senses, including the ear sense. So, do you still hear sounds, or what is the definition of a thorn? Is it something that is it's an obstruction, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the thorn would then be something that obstructs you from entering jhana, for example. Yeah, so it would obstruct you from actually going in, because it would be sound is the last thing that you kind of give up as you move towards proper samadhi. So that because sound is the last part of the sensory realm, it is also the thing that may block you from getting access to the first jhana. So in that sense, it is a thorn. It may also be a thorn in the sense that a loud sound may actually be able to penetrate the jhana, perhaps. It can be the first thing that actually arises, possibly here. So I think in those two ways, it is a thorn, potentially here.
It can, like a balloon, it can inflate.
Say again?
Like a balloon, you puncture with a thorn, sort of.
Something like that, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Ajahn. Thank you.
So, Ajahn, I just want to check if my understanding is correct, or whether that is from the sutta, because I was taught that the jhana, at various level of jhana, right, is just a progressive, as if metaphorically progressive suppression or weighting down the weeds. But when the rock is removed, the weeds, even if it's dormant or seemingly dead, will still sprout out. That's the function of the jhana only. Is that from the sutta?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, but it's not as if it is just the holding down of the weeds. That sounds like it is kind of underplaying the power of jhana a little bit, because it actually changes you for life. Once you've had one of these experiences, because you have seen something more profound than normally what you can ever see, it's like, I call it a positive trauma. You can never really forget it again, yeah? And so it has a fundamental insight aspect to it, that you understand the sensory world for the first time and the problems of that world. So there's lots of insight that goes with that. There's lots of positive trauma, where the real happiness is to be found. And also it keeps the weeds down for usually a long time, quite a long time afterwards.
For a long time.
Yeah.
But it's still subject to fall if it's not cultivated tent or garden, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, tend your garden. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Ajahn. In that, in 78, I think that is Sammāsamādhi, I think, if I remember.
That's the one, yeah.
That wholesome thoughts, Ajahn, would that be just anything other than unwholesome thought? Could be I'm just trying to see how to express that. It is not actually thought, but it is just the mind wanting to be out of piti sukha. Is that what it means? On that unwholesome thought? Unwholesome thought ceases in second jhana. That is what.
Unwholesome intentions, thoughts. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. What does it?
No, in the first. It's unwholesome ceases in the first.
Yeah.
Already, that's what.
Unwholesome finishes first in the first jhana. Wholesome thoughts ends in the second jhana, ceases.
Yeah.
So that wholesome thoughts, I think in that one, you mentioned, Venerable Sunyo, that Sankappa, I think it gives the details, those three Sankappas, I think in that one, ill will, non-renunciation, and
harmfulness.
Harmful thoughts, So, how can there be such thoughts in the second jhana? That is what was bothering me when I read that sutta, that wholesome thoughts cease in the second jhana completely. I think this is that Paribrajaka, Sammāsamādhi, when he I think in answering his question. So what does
the way
mean?
I interpret it is like you mentioned thought, you call it thoughts, which is already sort of, as I said, sort of questionable translation in that case. Intentions to me mean already something more subtle than thoughts, and in a way, the movement towards the piti sukha is like an intention for renunciation in a way, because you're moving further away from the five senses. You're already completely away from it, but it's like moving even deeper into the mind itself in a way.
So it is.
Yeah, that's how I think it should be interpreted.
I think, how I understood was that means no thoughts at all.
Yeah, that's exactly what it means.
That is what it means.
Yeah. So you give up the unwholesome in the first jhana, and there's only the wholesome left, and you give up the wholesome, and it's all gone. Yeah, everything is gone. Yeah,
so
I think that's the right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then the other one is that when you say placing the mind and keeping it connected, so it is moving from in the first jhana, moving away from the breath, because initially you place the mind on the object of the breath. And then keeping it connected with that. And then as you go ahead, and rather not going ahead, but as it happens, then the placing of the mind will be on the piti sukha?
Yeah, essentially, it's on the, exactly. But remember, at this point, it's automatic.
Automatic.
In the,
automatic.
as long as you're doing the breath meditation, it's actually, there's a feeling that you are in charge, there's a feeling that you are doing it. Whether that feeling is true or not is a different matter, but there's a feeling of that. But once you come to jhana, it's just a process that kind of happens by itself. So you're just watching this happening. You're watching your mind doing it.
Ajahn, again, I must ask this next one as well. I meant to ask last time. How do we relate these explanations to the four similes that happens in, like, I think it happens in Mahasakuldaya Sutta and then Mahasapura Sutta, those four similes, the bronze soap dish.
This is his area of expertise.
Those were also some of the slides that were taken out.
And the lake and the cloth and
we will probably do those in the next workshop.
Next workshop?
Yes, because there wasn't any time.
Okay.
They're very interesting, but we have to
immersion.
Because
Immersion is
they take so much time to explain those. Yeah.
Okay.
But one thing is very interesting there, which I will point out now because it connects to this the subject that we've been discussing. That in which was the guy? I think for the second jhana, the simile is the lake, with water coming only from within.
From the bottom.
Yeah, within the lake itself, and not from the north, the south, the west, the east, or above. So not from 5 places, but only from the lake itself, the water comes. To me, that clearly represents the mind and not the 5 senses, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But we'll, for those who think this is a bit obscure now, we'll discuss that in July or something, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ananda. All right. Maybe one more question, then we do 5 minutes of meditation. Ajahn?
Ajahn Brahms said occasionally that during the 9-day retreats, lay people have jagged jhana, indicating that it's not quite easy. I mean, it's not easy for lay people to get into the jhanas because of their activities. But you read in the suttas that there is a number of prominent people, lay people, who seem to be in the 4 jhanas quite readily. So could you talk about that? Comments on that?
Yeah, well, maybe there's lay people right now also who attain the jhanas regularly. I haven't met them, but they, or maybe I have met them actually, but they didn't tell me. Could happen. There's nothing about putting on the rope that suddenly gives you better meditation suddenly. Of course, the whole lifestyle supports it very well. But I also think that in the time of the Buddha, there hadn't been a Buddha for a long time. The Dhamma had disappeared for a long time. And it's like, imagine you're in your bathroom and you have the sink with the plug in it. And your tap is dripping, drip, drip, drip. This is like many eons of beings who are very well developed. They start collecting in the sink in a way. And the water keeps rising, rising, rising. Then comes the Buddha and he pulls out the plug. And all those beings who were ready to get enlightened, who really had very developed minds already, suddenly all went through the sink and went to Nibbana basically. And they were all there at the time of the Buddha. And now the sink is empty, but the tap is still dripping. So there's still people who are getting enlightened and who attain all the jhanas. But it may be rarer than in the time of the Buddha. That's what I'm saying. That's what I think anyway. But it's definitely not impossible.
And there are people today. I mean, I know some lay people who have amazing meditation, and so there are not many of them. There are only few, far between, really. But there are some who are extraordinary. But they are, you have to know who they are, and you have to. It's not easy to know who they are unless you have kind of a broad-based contact with many people and you know what's going on. But there are people even today who are exceptional meditators. So it does happen. Yeah.
But it just seems that in the time of the Buddha there were a number of people who got to the jhanas easy, but it's not so common now. Would that be right?
I don't know if you can say that. I'm not sure. I think it's really hard to say. If you look at the suttas, there aren't that many who were regular attainers of jhanas. There were kind of maybe a handful or something. There wasn't a large number. So I think it's uncertain. I think most of those people would have become monastics, yes, because if you have that kind of ability, then lay life doesn't seem so attractive anymore. If you have no interest in the 5 senses, kind of lay life starts to seem pointless. And so most of them would have been monastics, I would guess. Probably a bit like now, maybe.
Yeah. The suttas is also like the highlights, You never hear about all the
lowlights.
Anyway, shall I do the 5-minute meditation?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so let us carry on. And we're going to start with the second jhana now. Before I do that, let me just very briefly summarize the idea of the first jhana. So the main points that we were talking about is to understand the formula for the first jhana, and that formula, Vitakka-vicara, means that you have left behind the five senses, vivicca akusalehi dhamme, that you have given up the five hindrances, then vivekkaja piti sukha means this is the rapture and bliss born of separation. This means a very high degree of rapture and bliss, not any ordinary kind, but one that is developed through a long process. And then Vitakka-vicara does not mean thinking and pondering. It means basically just a movement of the mind onto the object and a holding on. So that is the idea of the first jhana. Now we're going to go through the next three jhanas as well, and we're going to do that much faster, obviously, because now we have done the foundation work, and we're just going to see how the process happens, what it is that happens between each one. So starting with the second one. So as the placing of the mind and keeping it connected are stilled, they enter and remain in the second jhana, which has the rapture and bliss born of stillness, with peace and internal confidence, and unified mind without placing the mind and keeping it connected. So this is the idea here. So let's go through this in a little bit of detail, the various parts here. So placing of the mind and keeping it connected are stilled. Yeah, this is so the vitakka and vicara comes to an end. Vitakka-vicara. Actually, that's at the end, I think. Yeah, but anyway, same thing here. Yeah, so this comes to an end. In other words, the mind is stilled. There's no more movement. This is why this particular jhana is called the full samadhi for the first time. The first jhana is not really the full samadhi in the same way. This is the full samadhi. They enter and remain in the second absorption. Again, this idea of entering and remaining, the idea that it is a state which has a certain quality, and you stay there for a certain amount of time before you emerge again, which has rapture and bliss born of stillness. So this is, you can see here how the path has various degrees of happiness. You start off with the pamujja, which is the gladness, then you have the piti, then you have the passaddhi, then the sukha, then you have the vivekkaja piti sukha, then you have the samadhija piti sukha. And this is the samadhija piti sukha, rapture and bliss born of stillness. So it is kind of one level of happiness, one level of rapture and bliss, deeper than the previous one after the other. And each one has kind of its own taste, and own kind of experience to it. So we're going deeper here. The bliss that comes from the complete stillness of the mind is more powerful than the bliss that comes from seclusion that we saw in the first jhana. So these are, each one is a development on the previous one. Would you like to comment on that? You have been happy with that? Okay, excellent. I like happy comments. And then comes a phrase which is unique to the second jhana, with peace and internal confidence and unified mind. And the words here, peace again is vupassama. We saw this word before. The idea of complete calm in the mind. Internal confidence is ajattang sampasadanang. And the idea here is that the reason why these words are used is because, again, for the first time, the mind is completely in samadhi. Because it is completely in samadhi, the peace is complete for the first time. There is no movement anymore. So beyond the second jhana, there is no further, it doesn't become any more peaceful because this is already complete peace. It just becomes more refined in other ways. But the peace has already reached a peak in the second jhana. Internal confidence, because the idea here is that when you are with the object all the time, there's no movement. It implies that the mind is fully confident in that object of the second jhana. No more movement of the mind. The confidence is complete, and that is why the mind stays with the object without this wobble, as we were talking about before. And then you have the unified mind. It's again the same thing again. This is ekodibutta, ekodibhava. And this is, the first jhana is called ekaggata. This is called ekodibutta or ekodibhava. And this again implies unified, completely unified. In other words, again, this means no movement. Everything is a still unified experience where there's no change in the experience. The idea of unification is that there is no change. One experience, moment after moment for long periods of time. So all of this is related to the idea that the samadhi has now reached its peak. There is no further development in samadhi, full unity of the mind at this point. So this is the thing that really stands out for the second jhana. And again, without placing the mind and keeping it connected, because these are coarser aspects that actually imply the unification. So I'm not going to spend more time on that. We have quite a bit to say on the third jhana, so we're going to just move on straight away to the third jhana experience. With the fading away of rapture, they enter and remain in the third absorption, where they meditate with equanimity, mindful and aware, personally experiencing the bliss of which the noble ones declare. Equanimous and mindful, one meditates in bliss. It's quite nice, isn't it? The noble ones declare, equanimous and mindful, one meditates in bliss. The noble ones again are kind of making it clear. This is wow, this is good stuff. And so let's just analyze quickly the parts again. The fading away of rapture. So the idea is again now the mind has already reached full stillness in the second jhana, so there's no more stillness to go. Now what is happening is that the mind is becoming more refined. And the coarsest aspect in the second jhana is the rapture, the piti. The piti is the coarser part. So that gets left behind, and all that is left is sukha. The happiness is all that's left behind. The bliss is all that kind of remains in this particular jhana state. So the rapture goes, because that's coarse. They enter and remain in the third absorption, where they meditate with equanimity, mindful and aware. So the more of the kind of the coarse pleasures, the coarser aspects of pleasure, the more they disappear, the more equanimous is the mind, because the mind is kind of in a state where it is the pleasure has a tendency to affect the mind, because it's very attractive. So you take away some of that pleasure, the equanimity becomes more prominent in that state. Mindful and aware. Mindfulness is now becoming very strong, and awareness. These things are emerging because all of the feelings that otherwise affect the mind are fading into the background. And you personally experiencing the bliss of which the noble ones declare. Equanimous and mindful, one meditates in bliss. And so here the bliss is the sukha, and this is the peak of sukha in samsaric existence. So if you want to experience pure bliss, this is where you want to go. Is anyone here who doesn't want to experience pure bliss? So this is it, right? This is kind of the purity of bliss, kind of shod of everything else, and that's all that remains. And beyond this experience, bliss disappears, and all there is equanimity. And equanimity, believe it or not, is superior to bliss, which is kind of weird, but that's how the path works. So this is the idea of personally experiencing bliss. And what is very interesting here is this word personally, because that is really fascinating. I will let Venerable Sunyo expound on that in great detail. So we're gonna. So Venerable Sunyo, please fire away.
Yes, it's very fascinating if you're interested in Pali and the meaning of Pali words. What I'm going to explain is maybe not the most pragmatic thing in the world again, but
it's very important. Actually.
It is important to get it right ideas, because you can be misled otherwise. And that's what we do at these workshops. We look at the suttas and the Pali and stuff, as you know, and you've been coming all this time already, so you probably like this kind of stuff as well then. So, to look at why, to consider why it's important to look at this Pali, let's look at Venerable Bodhi's translation for the third jhana. We just had Venerable Sujatos, and this is Venerable Bodhi's. With the fading as well of rapture, a bhikkhu dwells equanimous and mindful and clearly comprehending. He experiences happiness, that's the sukha, with the body. With the body. That's the word is there is Kayena, and I will talk about maybe 20 minutes about this word alone. And I'll also have you join in later as well with translating, so that will be interesting to see how you can translate Pali. He enters and dwells in the third jhana, of which the noble ones declare he is a equanimous, mindful one who dwells happily. And I'm a bit sad about this translation with the body, because that again implies that the sukha is something you feel in your body. And we had before Ajahn Sujato translating personally. Now there's a very wise monk who has said about this sukha that you experience, quote, with the body. This monk said, the happiness, also called sukha, the meditator is said to experience with the body in the third jhana is actually mental happiness. It's from the mind, as I explained before the break. This is not something bodily, this is something mental. It's identical with so manasa, which means good mind. Mana is the mind. So this is a very wise monk. Who do you think said this? No.
Ajahn Sunyo.
No.
He said, I think
it's senior to me. It's actually Bhikkhu Bodhi himself who said that. And that to me shows, I think, that sometimes Bhikkhu Bodhi is a bit too literal with his translation, because he realizes that the happiness experience with the body is actually mental. You don't feel it with the body. Still, he translates with the body. And I will show that it's too literal. And it's problematic because it's misleading people. And that makes me so fired up to talk about this, because people use these kind of translations to argue the jhana, you don't go into the mind, you feel your body. But this is wrong translations. And I wouldn't call it anything else than wrong. Okay. So the kaya is a Pali word, and actually has multiple meanings. It can mean the body, as in the physical body, and I've got here some translations from dictionaries. So this is Cohn's dictionary first. It can mean the body, the physical body, but kaya, the word kaya, can also mean the experiencer of sensation and feeling physically and or mentally. The word kaya can mean just the mental experiencer. And this is the PTS older dictionary. It says it can mean the material body, or it can mean the whole being, the inner sense, or the individual. This is two meanings of the word kaya. There's some more as well. The word kaya in the broader sense means something like a collection or a group, same as in English where you say a body of work. Like if a scholar has written many things, we call that the body of works of that scholar, or we say a body of evidence or a body of people. This is like a group of people. So that's the root meaning of the word kaya. But two derived meanings from that, again, there's more, but these are the ones I want to focus on, are body and something much more personal.
Yeah, I wonder whether they really are all that different, because sometimes we say that the body is kind of equivalent to the person. If I say to someone, don't touch me, or touch me, right? You're touching the body, but you're calling it me. So the body can actually be equivalent to the person in many cases. And I think this is just two different ways of looking at personality, in a sense, very often.
Yeah, often, but in the jhanas it does not mean the body, so it's different as well.
Yeah, but I think you can translate, even if it means the physical body, I think you can actually translate as a person, in a sense. It's a person in a kind of broader
in
broader
different
way.
contexts,
Yeah.
you mean. Yeah, that is true. And interestingly, yesterday evening, Ajahn Brahmali and me, we were preparing for these classes. We always do everything last moment. And we were talking, and there was a venerable from Bangladesh with us as well, Sumito. And when we talked about kaya, he said, kaya in, what was the language again?
Bengali.
Bengali, yes, means personally. It does not mean physical body at all. And Bengali, that language is much more closely connected to Pali. So in Bengali, the meaning has shifted to only number 2 here of these. The word kaya only means like personally. And they have different words for the physical body. But in Pali, these words were still both kaya. There's other words in Pali as well, by the way, which mean specifically the body, like sharira, and some others as well. Deha, we discovered. But yeah, my point here is kaya does not just mean the body. It can mean something else as well. And therefore, we have to use the context to determine what is actually the meaning of the word. Even in English, we have words like somebody. When I say somebody walked into this room, I don't mean that a physical body walked into this room. It's like a person walked into this room. That's what I mean when I say somebody. So even the word body in English is actually quite a good translation of kaya in a sense. Yeah, if you think about it this way, that body can mean a person as well. And now we don't, we still use words like somebody, but maybe 100 years back, you also could just use the word body by itself to refer to a person. For example, this is from a philosopher called Thoreau, and he said, who would live there, in the city he was talking about, where a body can never think? Of course, it does not mean where your legs and arms and head cannot think. It doesn't mean the physical body. He means where a person can never think. That's what the word body could mean back then. It's not that long ago, but now we don't really say that anymore. Like, well, a body walks out of the room. It just it happens right at this moment, but we don't say that anymore. But you could say that 100 years or so ago. Yeah. So it's the same in Pali. The word kaya can also mean just a person, and not always the physical body. It's very important for the third jhana formula. Some other examples in the Pali of this is that we have this thing called sakkaya ditthi, and that you could break that down into real person view, the view that there is some real existent being inside of you, and not just no self, not just the aggregates. So here we also translate kaya as person, and even Venerable Bodhi himself does that as well, because personality view, I think, is his translation. So here he also translates kaya as person. We also have the kaya sakhi, which is then funnily translated as body witness by Venerable Bodhi. But then I think again he is being too literal. Because what is a body witness? And you're looking at your body. No, the idea is somebody who experiences or witness something personally. That's what kaya means here. Sakhi means like to see with your own eyes, really, is what it literally means, but it implies to experience something. And kaya means personally. They've personally experienced certain states of samadhi, for example. And in the Chinese canon has an explanation of this word. What is the person who experienced personally? That's kaya sakhi in the Pali, and the word for kaya is there, well, again, I don't know the Chinese, this kind of letter thing. That literally means body, but it's translated here personally by Charles Patton, who I asked to help me with this, because I don't read Chinese. And they said, here a person experienced personally. They don't believe other people, don't believe what the Tathagata says, nor do they believe what's said by worthy ones. They just live by their own capacity and disposition. So that's from Charles Patton. And now we said before that the Chinese translations were made in roughly 500 AD, but the suttas that they are based on go much further back, probably maybe within 2 centuries of the Buddha, would you say, Ajahn?
Yeah. I mean, a large part of the Chinese come from the Sammāsamādhi school. Not this one here. This is unknown which school this is from, but a large part of it goes from the Sammāsamādhi, and they would have existed from the time of Ashoka, roughly about soon after Ashoka. So
might be probably quite likely that the Sanskrit that underlies this sutta also goes back to those times. We don't have this exact quote in the Pali, but it seems like this was part of early traditions as well, this idea. So it clearly explains you what it means to experience something kaya here in this personally, not with the body. So now it's time for your involvement to wake you up a bit. It's time for the pop quiz. And now I will ask you to join me in translating the word Kayena. So I talked about kaya, which means either body or person, and Kayena is what we call, technically, you don't have to know that, but an instrumental form, and that means, it means with the kaya, or by the kaya, so it means with the body or by the person. So by the person personally is what that means. Kayena can therefore mean with the body, very literally, or personally. Some other options as well, of course, but those are the two we will focus on here. So, this is a line from the suttas, and I have left one word untranslated. They witness ultimate truth, Kayena. And now it's up to you to decide how to translate Kayena. Do we translate it as with the body or personally? So, they witness ultimate truth with the body, or they witness ultimate truth personally. Who votes for with the body? Okay. That is actually how Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it, if I recall correctly. So that is a bit awkward. But who votes for they witness ultimate truth personally? Yeah, for the people offline. Nobody voted for with the body. Everybody voted for personally. And I think you are good translators, because I agree. Okay, personally, that's what I think is the best answer. Another example. After hearing little of it, they see the Dhamma, Kayena. Again, who votes for with the body? They see the Dhamma with the body. Who says they see the Dhamma personally? All right, excellent, same as before, wow. This is a good class. Personally, yes. That is already 2 out of 2, 100% so far. Those things I previously heard about, I now experience Kayena. Who votes with the body? Who votes personally? Yeah. It's things you heard about before. Yeah, you now experience them for yourself. You experience them personally. Or you could say directly rather than indirectly, like hearing it from others. Now you really have it personally.
This is really convincing, you know. This is super duper.
But yeah, you don't experience that with the body, things you heard about. Yeah, and these things you heard about are, of course, like stages of enlightenment, the jhānas, etc. That's what the suttas are talking about, I think. I can't remember exactly the context, but that's probably what it must be talking about here. So now, we've got 3 out of 3. There's 1 left. See if you can get that as well. After the delight fades away too, they attain the 3rd jhana, where equanimous, mindful and aware, they experience pleasure, Kayena, which the Noble Ones describe as a pleasurable abiding, equanimous and mindful. So, now it's up to you. Is this pleasure with the body? Who votes with the body? Who votes personally? Okay, wow. This is excellent. Yes.
This is really good brainwashing. I'm very impressed.
Well, I didn't. You translated it yourself.
That's what I mean.
I didn't do anything. But you see here the same idea. Yeah, the Noble Ones describe a certain pleasure And then you experience that for yourself. You experience it personally. There's exactly the same idea as in the previous quote, where we've seen, what I heard about before, I now experience it personally. And that is what this Kayena is about in the third jhana. You experience personally what the noble ones described before. Then they describe dwelling in pleasure, equanimous and mindful, pleasure here being the sukha. Yeah, well, that the point, what you're saying is personally implies a self, but you shouldn't look at it that way. It's like your mind experienced it for its self, if you want to be very technical. But even the words like they attain, you could say apply a self. You shouldn't look at it in that way, because otherwise you could say almost nothing about the attaining the jhanas. You always have to use words to describe things. Yeah.
You could translate as directly instead, if you wish. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yep. Directly, personally, sort of same idea.
Yep.
Directly, as in not through the words of others, but for yourself, right? Directly, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, let's wait with questions until a moment later. Yeah, otherwise we will get derailed a bit. We still got a lot to go as well. So personally, so this is what people have translated. It's not a new idea. So Venerable Sujato has personally experiencing the bliss of which the noble ones declare, which we've seen before. But already almost 70 years ago now, I.B. Horner translated also experiences in his person. It's a little bit, yeah, it's a little bit awkward in a way, but the idea here is again personally, yeah, and not in the body. So she already realized this, and actually the commentaries already realized this as well. So it's not a new idea at all. But for some reason you still find these translations pleasure with the body, and that is so deceiving in a way. Maybe not purposefully deceiving, but deceiving regardless. So these are translations that get my thumbs up again. Also the Chinese, Analio translated, with their whole being experiencing acute happiness. I don't know what the Chinese for acute is anyway. But his footnote is, the word for body renders an instrumental Kayena in the Indic original, meaning the Pali, which in such context functions as an idiomatic expression to convey personal and direct experience. So really quite clear what this Kayena means. So maybe before we move to the fourth jhana, to explain, you sort of did it already, but why does the third jhana have this special thing that the noble ones say something about it? That we don't find that in any of the other jhanas. And Ajahn Brahmali already said it before, but I think it is because this is the peak of sukha. And you find throughout the suttas that the Buddha says, find a pleasurable abiding, a Vitakka-vicara. And this is, in a sense, the third jhana is the ultimate Vitakka-vicara in a way, because it's the most refined sukha that you can experience. And that is why the noble ones, I think, say this specifically about the third jhana and not about any of the others. Yeah? And what they say, you get to experience for yourself personally and not with the body. I hope that is satisfying for all of you.
Shall we take some more questions before we carry on? Is that a good
not?
idea? Maybe a couple of questions?
Why not?
Thank you. Yes. In the Satipatthana Sutta, one of the first stanzas, kaya anupasse vihirati. Now, I've always had trouble trying to understand that as being aware of the body in the body. Could you interpret it more like this, where one of the kaya words is personally, so personally being aware of the body? But then that would not work well with the following on.
Yeah, no, that is different context.
Okay.
So there it does actually mean the body, and it means like focusing on a certain aspect of the body. For example, the breath is called literally a body in the body,
Okay.
but the breath is like an aspect of the body. So you pick a certain meditation subject, like for example the breath, or the nature of the body to die, or the four elements. You pick that, and that is like choosing a body in the body in
Right.
a way.
Okay.
Yeah. So there it does actually mean body. Yeah. Yeah. That's how I interpret that phrase anyway. That's how Venerable Sujato explains it as well. And I think it's the most satisfying explanation.
Thank you, Bhante.
Earlier today, you talked about the 5 hindrances, and I was wondering what the antidote is for some of those hindrances. So if you were in lay life, for example, how do you get rid of doubt, restlessness, torpor? I mean, ill will and sensual pleasures, you can see the antidote for those 2, but the other 3?
I think maybe it is a little bit too much on the side of what we're doing now. Is that, am I allowed to say that? I realize it is very practical and very important. But I think if you go back to listen to some of the early workshops that we actually discussed those before, I would recommend that, because I feel this is actually quite a broad topic, yeah, and we need a few days to cover that, I think. So we'll see what happens. Come on my next retreat if you wish, and I'll always talk about those things on my retreats. See what, yeah.
But you could summarize it as letting go.
Letting go, yeah.
Letting go.
Yeah.
It's always good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Letting go counters all the hindrances.
Thank you, Ajahn. I think in the third jhana, the main thing is the equanimity.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to recall, I think it is in the Salayatana Vibhanga Sutta, 137, Ajahn?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's, Buddha describes those 36 types of, and then at one stage, the between equanimity, the spiritual equanimity,
Yeah.
if I remember right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Buddha explains there that that you go beyond the object. I think in that sense, it says goes above the, not the Puthak-jhana. Puthak-jhana, when he is equanimous, he's equanimous with the object, the kama guna, and but in this case he says the educated Sutava Arisavako, Sutava Arisavako transcend, that's the word, I was looking for the word.
Right. Yeah.
Transcends the object. Is that relevant here as well, Ajahn?
I think so. I think it's very relevant here.
Very relevant
yeah,
here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
that's a kind of a lower equanimity. The Puthujjana is kind of a lower equanimity where you're just equanimous in the sensory world, but actually you want to go, as we say, completely beyond it. I think that's also in the Potalya Sutta.
Potalya Sutta.
54. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So this is really that is connected with this third jhana, sukha.
Even the fourth jhana, as we shall see soon. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, shall we carry on? Maybe should we do? How would let's just carry on through, because let's stop there, Bill, because we are running out of time as always, and there's many more very important slides to do, so we have to get through to those. So the fourth jhana. Okay, so here comes the fourth jhana. Very exciting. Giving up pleasure and pain, ending former happiness and sadness, to enter and remain in the fourth jhana, without pleasure or pain, with pure equanimity and mindfulness. So going through the bits and pieces again, giving up pleasure and pain. So this is sukha and dukkha. And you may think, why is pain mentioned here, right? It doesn't seem to make any sense because pain surely has disappeared a long time ago. But the idea here is that pleasure and pain come as a pair. And you're only giving up pleasure at this point because sukha goes all the way to the third jhana. Only now do you give up sukha completely. So you're giving up the whole pair together because they belong together. Even though dukkha has been given up a long time ago, the pair is only given up now. Yeah, that's kind of the idea behind this. And then that means that you basically, when there's no suffering and no happiness anymore, it's kind of that whole area which is so important to human beings, finding happiness in the world, avoiding suffering, that whole thing, in a sense, you have gone beyond that. And that's kind of extraordinary, yeah? Because this is what drives us as human beings. So one of the main drivers of us as human beings is actually abandoned. And you can imagine what that does to the mind. It gives you a very different view of reality.
Yeah, here it means dukkha in like a feeling tone of dukkha, and not dukkha in the widest sense of the word, where everything experienced is a form of dukkha, including the fourth jhana as well. It's not like you enter the fourth jhana and there's no suffering anymore, in that sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. So thanks for pointing that out. Yeah. So there's no feeling of suffering anymore and no feeling of happiness. And then the former ending of happiness and sadness, this is somanassa and domanassa. This is the mental aspect of happiness and sadness. So this is piti, would here be that mental aspect. So this is basically what it's referring to here. And sadness, domanassa, of course, was already abandoned a long time ago. So this is a former, so this is all gone. Yeah, so it means that there is no happiness, no pain, no pleasure, no displeasure, either in the mind or in the body. So all that is left, when all pleasure and pain are gone, all that is left is equanimity, is adukkha sukha, neither pleasure nor pain. So this whole thing, which tends to drive us as human beings, whether it's the source of craving, independent origination, vedana paccaya tanha, all of that is basically gone. And of course that means that you are going to look at the world in a very, very different way when you understand that abandoning all of this is all gone. Actually, that is a higher kind of happiness in a way. Fourth jhana is more happy even though there's no happiness there. This is kind of the paradox here. They enter and remain in the fourth absorption without pleasure or pain, with pure equanimity and mindfulness, pure upekkha and sati. So this is kind of the first time you experience pure equanimity and mindfulness, where these things reach their absolute peak. And for this reason, and we shall see this if there is a future workshop, we don't know if there's going to be one, but maybe there will be. And if there is one, we're going to see why this is like the ideal stage from which to achieve insight, precisely because equanimity and mindfulness achieve their peak at this particular point. All right. So now we're going to delve into another topics. I will pass on to Venerable Sunyo again.
Thank you. That was very insightful about this sukha and dukkha. That was very, very good. Thanks, Ajahn. So, many of you will know that after the fourth jhana come the so-called arupa states. It's called, often translated as formless state, sometimes immaterial as well. But to explain what arupa states are, we first need to talk about the word rupa. So, how about rupa? Usually translated form. And the word rupa, in certain contexts, it's quite similar to the word kaya. Kaya sometimes refers to the body, but sometimes not. It's similar with the word rupa. Sometimes it refers to the body, but not always. And that is why it's translated as form, which is a little bit of an awkward word sometimes when you read the suttas and it talks about form. You don't know what it means. But this is because the word rupa is maybe one of the most difficult words to really translate into English, because we don't have a good equivalent. Maybe in Sinhalese there might be, or other languages, but in English not. So we have this little bit awkward word form. I would not say that form applies works so well with respect to the jhanas, but I'm going to use it anyway, because that's the usual translation. However, let's look at a dictionary first. This is actually from a Sanskrit dictionary. It doesn't really matter because the word rupa is the same in Sanskrit and Pali. And sometimes people say, oh, the word rupa means the body, but that is simplistic, often too simplistic, because here this dictionary says that rupa can mean an appearance or a phenomenon or a color, a form or a shape or a figure. Any kind of appearance is included within rupa. For example, objects of sight are rupa. Even colors are a form of rupa. I see the green exit light, then the color green is a rupa. It's one form of rupa. If you experience the nimittas as lights, then those lights are also called rupas, including in the Pali Canon. So the word rupa is much more than just physical. It has this whole idea of anything that has some sort of appearance or whatever. It's hard to point down exactly. And to show you that the word rupa in the context of the jhana does not mean the body, we can consider the 5 so-called higher fetters, which I talked about last week a little bit. This is the same text from last week. And it goes, and what are the 5 higher fetters? Desire for the form states, the rupa, raga, and these are the jhanas, is what it refers to, or desire for the formless states, the arupas, and also conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. So these 5 higher fetters actually is interesting, because non-returners have no desire for the 5 senses, nor any attachment to the body. The non-returners do not get reborn in the sensual realm anymore, including the human realm, because they don't have that kind of attachments anymore. They don't have attachment to the 5 senses at all, to the body at all. They don't identify with it. They have let it go and are no longer attached to the body. They also have given up, is said, the fetters of sensual desires. And we've seen before, sensual desire refers to anything having to do with the 5 senses. So the non-returners have given up anything having to do with the 5 senses. But here it still says they still have desire for rupa, which implies that rupa is something beyond the 5 senses in this context. Does that make sense? I'm going to quickly here, yeah? So this shows you that the word rupa, when it refers to the jhanas, has nothing to do with the 5 senses, including the body, because the non-returners abandoned that already, but they still have this rupa, desire for the jhanas. So rupa means, again, something much more subtle. And there are some other hints in the suttas for this as well. It's also a little bit of probably what we could call a later sutta, but it's still in the Digha Nikaya, and it says a threefold classification of rupa. There is visible, tangible rupa. So visible and tangible means you can see it, you can feel it. That is like the body. That is, you can feel it, you can see it. That is visible, tangible rupa. There is also invisible, tangible rupa and invisible, intangible rupa. And what is invisible, you cannot see it with your eyes, and you cannot feel it with your body, but it's still rupa. That's the last of the 3, and that is the kind that exists in the jhanas. Yeah? And some people apply the first of these 3. They think that is what the rupa in the jhanas are about, this visible, tangible form like the body. But that's not correct. It's about this third one, invisible and intangible. You cannot see it, you cannot feel it with your body. And there's also a sutta that says that rupa can come about through mind contact. And it goes like this. If the mind is intact, a mental phenomena comes into its scope, and there is corresponding attention there, then this corresponding section of consciousness, meaning mind consciousness, arises. This is talking about the process of phassa, or contact, sense contact, at the mind. So this is how things in the mind happen. And then the sutta continues, the form that has arisen through that process of contact is included in the aggregate of form. So here it is saying that rupa can arise at the mind itself. Yeah? Inside of the mind you can have rupa arising, like the lights you see as nimittas are existing in the mind. And the sutta, you should read the whole thing, because I just took a little bit out, and it goes through all the 6 senses and all the aggregates. So it's much more complex than just this, but it shows you that the idea at least existed very clearly, that you can have rupa through mind consciousness. That's the point I'm making. Because some people think rupa only is from body consciousness. That's not how rupa is used in the suttas always. So my point here is, very simply, the form in the jhanas is a mental phenomena. And even then, the word form is a bit awkward to use, because the jhanas are not a form. So that is the main takeaway from this that I want you to know, because this is practical in a way, because when you again are told to focus on the body because that is rupa, then you're doing something that does not really lead inwards, and it does not necessarily lead to the jhanas. Again, relaxing your body and all these kind of things are good, and it can in a way lead to the jhanas, but if you stick to the body and think that the body has to be your object all the time to go into the jhanas, then you get stuck in that kind of meditation, and you will actually not move on towards the real piti sukha. And that is my main point here. But of course the question remains, what then is this arupa, and how does it relate to rupa? And to really understand that, just like everything else we've been talking about, to be honest, you really have to experience arupa, the absence of rupa, to understand what rupa means. It's just like you cannot really understand, well, the jhanas without experiencing them. You cannot really understand the hindrances without first having abandoned them. Likewise, you cannot really understand rupa without having abandoned it. And while the jhanas are quite profound, the arupas are even more profound. Even less people experience this.
They also experience with the body, right? Kayena.
No, even the arupas are said to be experienced Kayena
with the body,
in some suttas.
Yeah.
Yes.
Attavimokkha Kayena Pattisangvedi.
Yes. So, but it's clearly that it means personally there, as we all agree, I think. Yeah. So about arupa, to understand what rupa means, you have to know what arupa is. So you have to go beyond the 4 jhana to really know. So I went to Ajahn Brahm and asked, explain to me what rupa means in the jhanas. And he had a real hard time to explain this, because we are explaining things in the realm of words. You might have noticed that even before, when we were talking about Vitakka-vicara and the wobble, that we were struggling exactly how to explain this, what that means, what that is, because this is already far beyond the realm of words, and the arupas are even further beyond. So Ajahn Brahm really, he even admitted that he couldn't really explain it. So what am I gonna do? Am I gonna explain it better than Ajahn Brahm? No. But I will quickly go through the jhanas and give you an idea of what the arupas are like. I mean, I don't mean I'm gonna sit here and go through the jhanas. I mean I'm gonna explain them. Okay. So to repeat, first jhana, you leave behind the 5 senses and the hindrances, and there is only a feeling of delightful pleasure and the mind moving towards that. Second jhana, the mind is still because the movement has ceased. third jhana, the object becomes more simplified in a way that you only left with the bliss and no longer the more coarse, if we can use that word, piti, the delight or joy. Fourth jhana, even the sukha disappears and you're only left with the peace, basically, with just awareness of equanimity, of peace. And after the fourth jhana, the awareness also starts ceasing. And this is where the arupas, what the arupas are about, is awareness starts ceasing in the arupas. The object of peace starts to disappear, and therefore the awareness also starts to disappear. And you can imagine what this is like if you attain some of the jhanas. You can sort of extrapolate what this means. You take away the object in the jhana, then awareness will also disappear. And this is what happens slowly within the arupas. Stage by stage, awareness starts ceasing until you reach what they call the cessation of perception and feeling. It really means cessation of awareness and the object of awareness. They both cease together. So that is where awareness ceases completely. That's what the arupas are. Now, when you move from the fourth jhana to the first arupa, in the fourth jhana you still are aware of the peace in some kind of space is the best word. But when you move on forward, this is what Ajahn Brahm talks about. The first arupa, the state of unbounded space, it's called. From the fourth jhana, the mind can look into the perfect peace to perceive absolute one-pointedness in space. This is one of the features of the fourth jhana, always available for inspection, as it were, and it is the doorway into the arupa attainments. In this absolute one-pointedness, space is perceived. He is talking about here about the first arupa now. Space is perceived both infinite and empty, sort of non-space. So Rupa, as I said before, has this idea of appearances, and you can see how that relates to space, because anything that has an appearance of any sort happens in a sort of space. This is the best way I can explain it. It's even worse than how Ajahn Brahm explained it to me. But in a way, it doesn't really matter, because our jobs as meditators is to abandon the hindrances and let go. And whatever is the result of that, may it be first jhana, second, third, fourth, whatever, maybe the arupas one day, is okay. Because we have abandoned the hindrances, and that is the most important point. And even some arahants in the suttas seem never to attain the arupas. The fourth jhana was enough for them. So we don't have to worry too much about exactly what Ajahn Brahm is talking about here. For pragmatic reasons anyway. So we've got only a couple more minutes left for this. Ajahn.
Okay. All right. So we have the whole idea of what we have done so far is just to make the point that jhanas are very profound states, let alone the arupa states, which are even more profound. And this is very important, as I mentioned to begin with, because of all the discussions that have been had around the world in Buddhist circles, whether jhana is jhana light or jhana deep. Is it profound or is it kind of relatively easy? And I think we have seen quite clearly that actually they are very profound states, and jhana deep is really the answer to this. Now I just wanted to kind of just briefly kind of round this up. Another way of thinking about this that is sometimes mentioned is the idea that of sutta jhana versus visuddhimagga jhana. And this is the idea that the sutta jhana is a kind of easy jhana, whereas in the Visuddhimagga, which is a commentarial work, is a later exposition based on the suttas, the jhanas become more profound. And the idea is kind of to make, the suttas, they speak of an easy way, the Visuddhimagga about a difficult way, and so because we should follow the suttas, throw out the Visuddhimagga and then do the easy way instead. But actually, this, I think, is a misunderstanding. one of the important things is not to dismiss the commentaries too easily, because usually the commentaries are very authoritative regarding the suttas, and usually they get it right, and usually we get it wrong. So it's not a bad idea to take the commentaries actually quite seriously. But anyway, let's see what the Visuddhimagga has to say. This is a quote from the Visuddhimagga. It says, herein applied thinking, this is Vitakka, is applied thought. Vitakka, hitting upon, is what is meant. It has the characteristic of directing the mind onto an object, mounting the mind onto its object. Its function is to strike at and thresh. And so here you can see this is exactly what we have been talking about the applying the mind to the object. This is exactly what the Visuddhimagga is saying. So the Visuddhimagga really is exactly the same as our analysis have been throughout, that this is not about thinking in any ordinary sense, it's about the mind applying itself to the object. Yeah? So I just want to make the point that there isn't really any distinction here between the suttas and the Visuddhimagga. It's all pointing in the same direction. So this is vicara, this is the other word we have been looking at. Sustained thinking, vicharana, is sustained thought. Vicara, continued sustainment, that's a bit of awkward English, isn't it? Anyway, anusancharana is what is meant. It has the characteristic of continued pressure, on occupation with the object. So it's the idea of the mind staying with the object, holding on to the object, as we saw before. So here, the way we have analyzed the suttas matches what you find in the Visuddhimagga. The commentaries usually actually are very reliable, and usually we should be very careful with throwing them out. There is in fact no difference between the two. We should respect the ancient commentaries and be careful not to overestimate our own understanding. It's very easy in the contemporary world to say that the commentaries have it wrong, and to say that we have found this discrepancies. Sometimes that may be true, but we should be very careful with those kind of judgments, and we should really take the commentaries quite seriously before we dismiss them. So,
can I say
please,
two words about that?
Of course you can. Yeah.
Often people think that the commentaries, Pali commentaries, were written by Buddhaghosa, and that they were everything in there was his ideas. But actually, Buddhaghosa compiled the commentaries, is probably a better way. He based his words on all the commentaries that go way, way back to India itself and to very early days. And he also always says, I am quoting the ancients. And he doesn't introduce his own ideas, maybe once or twice in the whole Visuddhimagga. So we should also see these commentaries as not Buddhaghosa's ideas, but the ideas basically of the whole Theravada tradition. It's the whole Theravada tradition which compiled the commentaries in a sense. And there may be some mistakes, errors in the commentaries here and there, for sure. But when we talk about something as important as meditation and the jhanas, then if you say the commentaries are wrong, you are effectively saying that the Theravada tradition was wrong. And if they are wrong about something as essential as meditation and jhanas, then what are we? That to me would be very weird anyway. I think broadly speaking, Visuddhimagga has it quite right. Of course, tiny details may be weird, but the broad idea is exactly the same as the sutta.
And the idea that it is the entire Theravada tradition is, I think, very important, because it means that some of those commentaries may very well go back to the disciples of the Buddha himself, right? May go back to the very earliest times, and then they have accumulated over time until eventually then they were compiled, as you say, by Venerable Buddhaghosa in the 5th century AD. So that is true.
And these ideas about jhanas are not just the Theravada tradition.
Right, which we have made a number of times. They seem to be in all the various Buddhist schools and traditions. So this is not something that is very peculiar in any way. So, good. I'll just summarize quickly so we finish off, and then we can, if we have time, we can ask you some final questions towards the very end. So just summarizing everything. And Venerable Sunyo, please feel free to chime in whenever. So the summary of the whole course is that jhana is profound.
That's my chime.
It's a chime? Okay, very good. It is very profound, and it is very close to the end of the Buddhist path. It is always found in connection with the 4 stages of awakening, and basically it is on par, almost on par with that. We need to get this right. If we misinterpret jhanas, we quite likely cut off the possibility of awakening. So this is why it is important to understand these things properly. Otherwise, we make the path very difficult for ourselves. Sometimes people argue that you want to make the jhanas more easy, because if it's more easy, then more people will get jhana. Yeah, but that's true. More people will get jhana in quotation marks, but they won't make it to awakening because they've cut that path off. So it's not really very helpful at all.
It's like making it more easy to get a driver's license or something. And everybody starts crashing and stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So jhana light is just not deep enough. That's the problem with it. Once you have the real jhana, you are very close to the end of the Buddhist path. Yeah, it is the last factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. And basically it means that if you get to the jhanas, especially if you go all the way to the 4th jhana, the 4th jhana is really the end of the path, it means that basically you are there. Together with the right view, it is almost inconceivable. You will not wake up, at least become a stream enterer, quite likely an arahant because of that. So you're pretty much done, yeah? Then, okay, what next? All that is required is the right view of the Buddha. The right view, the first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, is the spark. That together with the power of the mind in the 4th jhana, spark, and then the power, bang, it goes off. And then what happens? It then all comes together in an awakening experience. Then what? Awakening is the subject of the next workshop. Sorry. we don't know when this is going to... So this is a bit unfortunate. So see you all... maybe we'll see you all in July. It really depends on what happens. But I'm afraid that's it. Yeah, so now it is already 2:30. We can have a few last questions if there are any, because we can probably go another 10 minutes or so before we do the final farewells. Ananda.
Sorry, Ajahn, thank you. The nimitta, Ajahn, is Ajahn Brahm always, I think, at least implies that it is an essential requirement. I think from memory, I didn't come to the first workshop, but I went through the slides. You mentioned 904 times that the jhana appears in the suttas.
Yeah.
And also, I think out of 152 sutta, maybe at least 2/3 of the suttas have the jhanas mentioned.
Yeah.
But I came across only in 2 suttas, the nimitta, that is 128, Upakilesa, and the Mahasakuldai Sutta. It's a very abstract form.
Yeah.
It is mentioned in a very abstractly.
Yeah.
Ajahn, I think you may recall that about the Rupa and the light, nimitta. So if that is the case, if about 80 to 90% of the sutta where jhana is mentioned, nimitta is not mentioned, implicitly or expressly, how...
Do you explain this?
How...
Okay,
do you justify the nimitta?
This is my explanation, okay? My explanation is as follows. The Buddha, he focuses on the most salient feature of the experience. And the most salient, the most important feature of the experience is what you see when you look at the dependent liberation sequence, which we have looked at here. Pamujja, piti, passaddhi, sukha, samadhi. Pamujja, gladness, piti, rapture, passaddhi, tranquility, sukha, bliss, and then samadhi, the stillness of the mind. That is what we should look at. And I think the problem with these visions is that they can often be very deluding. I hear a lot of people saying they see things in their meditation, and sometimes the things they see is completely unreliable. Some people have very visual minds. They see shapes without having any experience of happiness. So I think the Buddha points to the thing that actually is the critical thing that is important. The critical thing is the feeling tone that goes with it. And he focuses on that instead of focusing on visual things that are tend to be more deluding. That would be my guess why he doesn't talk about that. So I think the nimitta, visual nimitta, may be a necessary part of the meditation process, but it should be taken in conjunction with the feeling. The feeling is the most important thing, yeah.
Yeah. Can I add something to that, Ajahn?
Please, of course, yeah.
I agree with that. But also there's also with the nimittas, the thing is it's very different for different people. It's just an interpretation, a perception of the mind, of how it perceives itself. And it can often be like lights, but it can also be sometimes sounds even, or feeling of shapes or whatever, forms. And because that is so different for individuals, I think that's why the Buddha didn't explain it in that much detail, because some people get confused, like I experience something different. You're talking about lights all the time, but for me it's more like a shape or a blob or a sound. And that's why the Buddha, I think, does not do that. Also, second point is that although the jhanas are mentioned again and again, it's actually interesting in the whole Pali Canon, suttas which pragmatically talk about how to get there are relatively rare, actually, as far as I can tell, compared to how much we talk about it in Buddhism nowadays. We talk a lot about meditation, how to abandon the hindrances was even a question. The Buddha actually, how to abandon the hindrances, it doesn't talk about it as much as you would expect. And you probably notice if you read the suttas, most of them are more about right view and that kind of thing. That's what I feel anyway. Yeah. It's even the Majjhima Nikaya, the really direct suttas about meditation, abandoning hindrances, I would say percentage-wise are quite
depends what you mean by that. I would say that Satipatthana, for example, is precisely about abandoning hindrances, and it's founded a lot, So it depends on how you think about it. Yeah.
But my point was going to be that how to meditate is also largely not contained in the suttas, but in the traditions itself, and that would have been taught from teacher to disciple a lot. And outside of the suttas. That's what I think anyway. Yeah. And that is sort of what also the commentaries coming back in again. They teach us these kind of things as well.
Yeah. Okay. So
I think there's one more question in the back.
Yeah, maybe. But okay, let's do the people who have been on the course first of all, because they are. Yeah. Lawrence just arrived. So please try the people who have been part of the course first of all, Bill, if there's anyone else. Okay, so Lawrence, yeah.
Well, maybe he's all right.
Okay, so maybe Lawrence, if he has a last question there. Yeah.
There seems to be a happening in meditation where there's a complete vanishing of the subject, the meditator. What is that in relationship to jhana? Is that the attainment of the first jhana, or is it something else?
In the first jhana, like, the idea of being the subject does disappear, but you might think that it has disappeared and not have attained the jhana yet. It's very easy to delude ourselves to think that we don't experience things as a subject, when very subtly we still do. I talked about before that you can only understand the hindrances when you actually abandon them. And it's the same with the sense of self. You can only abandon it, you can only understand it when you really abandon it. And sometimes people think they have abandoned it, but they actually have not yet.
And also at the same time, the disappearing of all sensory activity. No sight, no sound, no sensation.
No thinking.
No subjectivity whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then coming back at some point, subjectivity reappearing.
Yes. That could describe a jhana, but also some other experiences perhaps as well that are not yet jhana, because there are some more aspects that also come in to play with the jhanas, like the wobble that we talked about, and going really inside the mind, leaving behind the nimittas, etc. Yeah. it's really very different from normal meditation. It's almost like normal meditation, you're like walking around in your mind, everything is very peaceful, gets quite nice, and suddenly you fall off the edge. That is like going into a jhana. It's like everything totally changes, flips around. That's another way of knowing whether the jhana was real or not. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe 3 loud sadhus to the 2 teachers for delivering the workshops.
Or to the Buddha's suttas. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Excellent. So, okay, so it's time to wrap up, I think. Yeah. So I would just like to thank everyone, just to finish off. So one of the main people to thank is the Honorable Lehar, who has been running the workshop, who has been the primus, the driver behind all of this. So well done, Lehar. It's wonderful to have you around so you can actually get things done. It's hard to get people who can really get things done, you know, that's wonderful. And I think as monks, we would probably stay in the monastery. You wouldn't see us here unless it was for people who kind of get us out and put us on these seats. And also to the AV team for your wonderful work in the booth over there, sitting there, just kind of hanging out. That was wonderful. And who else, Lehar, should we thank? Is that the main players, or yeah? And of course to everyone else that you have come here. If you hadn't come, it wouldn't have been the same without you, you know. So thank you for coming and for being part of this. And thank you, not least, to my wonderful co-presenter, Venerable Sunyo. It's really nice to have kind of someone who is kind of a lot younger than me, and as a co-presenter, it's a wonderful thing to have such a wise and knowledgeable companion in the spiritual life. What a wonderful thing that is. And last but not least,
one more person. Yeah, thank you a lot, Ajahn Brahmali, as well.
Great.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
Sadhu, sadhu, see you later.
and if things go well, I've sort of spoken with Lehar already. If it works out, then we might have another workshop coming up in July, and that is to finish off the 10-factored path, factor 9 and 10, which are right knowledge and right liberation, sammānyāna, sammāvimutti. These things are always uncertain, subject to change, but that's the plan at the moment. So please come back. Are you going to come back in July? Is anyone not going to come back in July? Who is not going to come back? No, I've just been messing around to see what's happening. So wonderful. Sadhu, sadhu, everyone. Let's pay respect to Buddha Dhamma Sangha before we finish off. Vitakka-vicara